And welcome to End Zone Focus. I'm Alan Lee. This week on the programme we'll be talking to James Cantrell in the UK about the outcome of the British elections. I'll be talking to him later in the programme. And also about prison reforms, in particular the three strikes policy which is currently going through Parliament. Critics of the legislation say that there's a danger of rushing this policy through without adequately understanding the implications for everyone involved, not only the victims but also the offenders and their families. My studio guest to discuss the issue is the Rev Ron Givens, who was Executive Director of the Prison Chaplains Association in California. And he's been brought here to New Zealand by the Howard League for Penal Reform to talk about what he's observed in the Californian prison system since that state brought in its own three strikes policy. And he joins me now. Ron, welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Prison Chaplains Association is now smaller than it was. What happened?
Well, it's much smaller. It's the Prison Chaplains Association is called the Associated Chaplains in California State Service, and what we do and our mission is to support all of the employed prison chaplains that work in not only California's prisons but also in the other institutions. They employ chaplains of 5 faith groups that are recognized for employment in California: Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Native American, and Jewish. Those are the only faith groups that are eligible to be employed as chaplains. And as a result of overcrowding, prison overcrowding, and the catastrophic budget crisis in California, chaplains have been reduced in roles, and the funding for our training association has been cut, and so has the number of chaplains. And as a result, myself, I'm now the political director for a union, which is United for No Injustice, Oppression, or Neglect. And we are very involved in prison reform and corrections reform, sentencing reform across the board in California.
So what is the three strikes policy? Let's go right back to the basics. What is California's three strikes policy? How does it work?
Well, I wish there was a simple answer to that. It was sold to the general public in 1994 as a one-size-fits-all justice system. Commit 3 major felonies and you're out. We'll lock up the key, lock up the door, throw away the key, 25 years to life, and you're done. It was sold as an ideal that if you committed a violent crime, rape, murder, manslaughter, more than once, serious assault and battery, by the time you get to the second strike, your sentence was automatically doubled. And by the time you get to the third strike, the criminal was then locked away for 25 years to life with no opportunity for parole. What has happened in actuality is things that are not necessarily violent felonies and old felonies have come into play. For example, I know the personal story of one inmate who was recently arrested on a third strike. And what he did was steal a candy bar from a convenience store. And on his way out the door, he made a threat to the cashier. In the 1980s, the same person had 2 felony arrests for check forgery. So those are obviously not violent felonies, but under the three strikes law, the way it has evolved since 1994, he was convicted as a third striker and is now serving life without parole in California's prisons. It's catastrophic. One of the things about the three strikes law is it tries to become a one-size-fits-all policy for sentencing. It takes the nature of the crime, the history of the criminal out of play. So little Johnny, who may have made a couple of mistakes early in life that were not necessarily serious and were not ever intended to be covered by this type of three strikes legislation, is now in danger of spending his entire life in prison for making a mistake 20 years later.
So is that's evolved from what was originally planned? So is that different to what they're planning to introduce into New Zealand law?
That's a very good question. You know, it's hard to find much about what New Zealand is planning. You know, what the whole law really entails. And that was the case in 1994 in California as well. No one was broadcasting the information that there was a two-strike component to it. And unless the body politic, the citizenry, demands to know all of the nuances going into something like this. They're in grave danger of getting something they never bargained for and being in the same position that we are now, really doing everything that we can to try and back up the bus in a climate of fear-mongering and campaigns by politicians who are afraid to appear soft on crime. So it really becomes an unchangeable or a Mount Everest type of issue where getting over the top of it is very, very difficult. We've had lawsuit after lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections. We still have very little access to getting into the prisons without actually having an employee tell us stories. Victims are becoming less and less willing to talk about their situations as well as their families for fear of retaliations by the prison guards. The powerful prison guard union has really just exploded since 1994. They are one of the most powerful organizations in the state of California, the Correctional Peace Officers Association, and have held our political process hostage several times over several budget years.
But no politician is ever going to say, I'm going to go easy on crime. I mean, they're always going to look for a way to appear to be tough on crime.
You know, we're not trying to get them to say that they want to be easy on crime. But we need to take a look at what we're doing as society and say, okay, this experiment didn't work. It's time to go back and revisit this. And we need to have a Christian attitude towards mercy and grace and be willing to understand that we made a mistake, that there are people suffering, generational incarceration, families being torn apart with no hope for healing. No hope for ever seeing the light of day, oftentimes. For children who are intentionally committing felonies so that they can go spend their lives with their fathers on the inside. These are laws of unintended consequences that you can expect under this type of policy.
We'll take a break. Our guest here on End Zone Focus is the Rev Ron Givens from California. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.